Okay, so again, our Shabbos, Good Chodesh. When I'm recording this, it is Rosh Chodesh El, Aleph El. Where we left off yesterday was on the bottom of Ches Amud Aleph. Today we're doing Ches Amud Beis, and the place where we left off was the Gemara asked the question. The Gemara said it seemed that Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, because he says you first check the woman to see how pretty she is in terms of figuring out whether or not you're going to disrobe her, is therefore chayish for hirhor. But when it came to skila, a woman who is mechuyev to die, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you only clothed her a little bit. Essentially, you left her mostly unclothed, which would seem to indicate that he's not chayish for hirhor. So the more answered, the difference is because by Sotah, you don't know if she's going to survive. There's a chance that she will survive. And if she survives, then it's going to be essentially causing the people who were around her, who were attracted to her, to be chasing after her for the rest of her life. Remember, she's the Sotah who has already been susceptible to be dealing with people, and now you're going to be sending more people on her. It doesn't make sense. Whereas by Skila, she's going to die, so there's no need to be chayish for her because she's not walking away from this. Now the Gemara continues. And we are a few lines up, 3 lines up from the bottom of the page on Ches Amud Aleph. Amar Rava. So Rava said, Rabbi Huda Kasha. You had a question on Rabbi Huda that it's a stira. And Rabbi Huda in one place is mashma that is chayish v'herhor by Sotah. But when it came to skila, he's not chayish v'herhor. That bothered you, and you had to find an answer for that. But the Rabbanan like kasha. But you have no question about the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say that when she gets skila, she is clothed, meaning that they're chayish v'herhor. When it comes to the Sotah, they let her be disrobed. They don't make a difference of how pretty she is. They're not chayish v'herhor. So what is the answer for the Rabbanan? Why aren't you asking about that? So the Gemara says, Alam Rava, Rabbi Huda like kasha. Rather, Rava said like this. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the reason that there's no stira is Kiddush Hanina. As we already explained, as we turn the page to Chesed Beis, that we've already explained why there's no issue according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That is, in the situation of Sotah is chayish for hirhor, and she's pretty, we're not going to disrobe her because she could potentially remain alive after the Sotah ordeal. And the Perchei Kuna or others that are going to be there that have seen her are going to be chasing after and hounding her. So that's why we have to be chayish for her. Or when it comes to skila, since there's no way she's getting up after the skila, so we're not worried about it. We're not worried about it in causing sort of issues further down the road. So therefore, we are not chayish for her, and she could be mostly disrobed. What about the Rabbanan? The Rabbanan, Lamiloi Kasha. But for the rabbi, it's also not a question. Why? Because Hacha time of my. What's the reason why over here? Meaning, over here in the parsha of Sotah, that the rabbis are not worried about hirhor and they let her get disrobed. They let her the kayan rip the clothing. Mishum v'nasur kol nashim, because we need the women who are around, who are going to see as a mitzvah for them to see this process. We need them to be sufficiently chastened, sufficiently chagrined, sufficiently scared that they won't cause any side issues in the future. And so if they see the woman being humiliated in such a manner, that's going to be a very strong and stark lesson. So it says the Gemara, the Rabbanan Lamelei Kasha Hacha Time Amay Mishum V'Nosur Kol Nashim Hasam over there by the Skila in the Chayisa Gadol Mizeh. There's no greater lesson as to what one shouldn't do than the fact that the woman is actually being stoned to death. So you don't have to disrobe her. We already know that it's going to be a significant and severe lesson for all the people that are surrounding. But by the Sotah, because the lesson could be lost if she wasn't humiliated and she survives. So therefore, we want the people to be remembering the something about the Sotah. So can we make her be remembered by if she lives? So rather, what we should do is make sure she's humiliated, disrobed, and so therefore, according to the Rabbanan, there's also no stira about in terms of Michayish V'Hera, because what the Rabbanan are focusing on is the lesson Is the lesson going to be learned? By Sotah, the lesson is going to be learned if she died, sure, but if she didn't, how would the lesson be learned? So the way we ensure that a lesson is going to be learned is by um, disrobing her. But in the situation of the Gemara and Sanhedrin, the lesson's going to for sure be learned because she's dying. So therefore, we don't have to add in any additional humiliation. Says the Gemara, "V'chitem lavid beitarti." Maybe we should do both. Why not do both the killing and the bizayon and the busha? Why not have both? What's felt epis? What's missing if we're going to do extra? Make it a really important lesson. No one's going to ever forget. Obviously, you're not worried about her getting up to walk away, so you're not afraid of the hero from that regard. So why spear her for a minute? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, Amar Kra. So Rav Nachman quotes Rabba bar Avua, the following famous line in Gemara Sanhedrin Mem Hey, Stet pasuk ve'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha mor loy misa yafa. We learn out from the pasuk ve'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha that you're supposed to, even when you're killing somebody, do it in a manner that is the best. Right? The person's gonna die. Is mechuyev misa, but at least do it in a manner that is going to be the the quickest, the most painless, the easiest to be able to get through. So according to the Gemara now, the Chachamim are in fact saying that the reason we don't disrobe her, the reason we let her get stoned with her clothing on, is because we want her to have a mitzvah yafa, which is mashma then the Gemara says, Lemader of Nachman Tanai. So let's say that this line of Nachman and Rabbi Barbu is really machlekes Tanai. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, when she's in Iskilo, she's going to be partially disrobed. So that means Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about mitzvah yafa. He's willing to do misa and b'tzyonis. But the Chachamim, who say that she's going to get skila while she's clothed, so they hold her of Nachman in the name of Rabbi Baravua that says that you shouldn't get more than the misa. You shouldn't have additionally bizyonis. So meaning they hold of this drush of After Chamecha Barla Mitziyafa, and Rabbi Yehuda does not. Says him or no, that's not a proof. Lloyd the Kuliyama Islahu Rav Nachman. Everybody could agree with the approach of Rav Nachman and Rav Baravua that there is in fact a chiyuv to bar the misa yafa, which you learn from Rahafta Echa Kamaycha. Even Rabbi Yehuda could agree to that. You're going to say then if that's the case, Rabbi Yehuda is learning that, then why is Rabbi Yehuda allowing this woman to be killed in a manner that is very humiliating? Bar the misa yafa, shouldn't that demand that you should get killed with your clothes on the same way the Chacham hold? Says the more no. Here there's a machlekes in terms of what is the best way to die. One opinion holds that, you know what, the bizyonis is really, even at the last moments of life, is still severe, it's still significant, and it's even more important than the regular tsar of the body. So when a person's getting stoned, the more clothes they have on them, the more protected they'll be from the stones, the slower, the more painful the death will be. But will be less shame. They won't be standing outside naked. So one man Amr says, you know what? It's better to have the clothes on. The Barla Misiyafa is better to have the clothes on and have a more painful death and a slower death, but not to have the public shame, humiliation of being naked. That is the opinion of the Chacham. Umar Savar Behuda disagrees. He said, "Tzar de gufa other flag tzayim is yainetz." You know how you be Barla Misiyafa? Get out fast. Kill her quickly in the most painful manner. Just do it, but get it over with. That is the Barla Misiyafa. That's how you're giving them the best death. And therefore it's more important. The minimization of the tsar of the bottom, the actual bodily harm, and the amount of pain that one's going to feel before it's over, than the sort of the more psychological humiliation of being naked. So it's better to be naked and get the stones mamash hitting the skin and ripping it out, and killing someone in a quicker, more painful fashion is actually that is the misiyafa that we prefer. So what we see from here is a very interesting idea that love your fellow like yourself is talking about death. So what is important to note here is a very famous Ramban. The Ramban in Parshas Kedoshim tells us is a davar haflaga. It's essentially it's a way of saying something beyond the exact. It's not haflaga means it's not exact. It's flowery. It's adding in words that are meant not to be taken literally. How does the Ramban know V'ahavta Kamecha is not to be taken literally? Ramban knows it because we know in the famous Gemara in Sanhedrin Memhei, right, when this Gemara appears, we know that we hold the Chayecha Kaidman, right? Chayecha Kaidman means your life comes first. If there's two guys and one guy has a bottle of water, and there are two guys who are dying of thirst, so does the person who has the bottle of water have to share with his neighbor? No, he keeps it himself. Chayecha kaidmi, your life comes first. So if you say v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, we don't mean it in a literal sense, because you don't actually have to love somebody to the extent that you treat yourself well, you have to treat them well. You treat them less well, your life comes first. In fact, as a result of that, the Ramban says that it's a haflaga. So Tosfos there in Sanhedrin points out that that's the reason v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha is used in sort of manners that are not as you would expect. We never say "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," that therefore there is actually a halachic requirement that you have to treat somebody like yourself to the nth degree. Not true at all. And that's why it only comes up in these sort of weird circumstances, like find them a good death, or the Gemara in Kedushin Mem Aleph, Asur lo kadesh isha ad sheyirena. Why? Shema yirba davar merguna v'tizgana lo, right? Maybe you're going to see something disgusting, you're not going to like her. So therefore, we have to say you have to see her first. Right? Because if you're gonna see something disgusting after you're already married and you're gonna not like her, you're gonna come to be over after Recha Kamecha. What do you mean? That's how you're over after Recha Kamecha? After Recha Kamecha is a positive obligation telling you to be wonderful and treat somebody like you treat yourself. No, no, that's not how it is. In fact, the Gemara goes so far in Shabbos Lamed Aleph when we have the three stories of would-be converts who come to Hillel. So one of them is somebody who says he wants to learn the whole Torah in 1 foot. So Hillel tells them, right? What you don't like, don't do to your friend. That's the whole Torah. So the Maharsha points out, why did Hillel say in the negative? He says also why he said it in Aramaic, but why did he say in the negative? Why didn't he say you have a positive obligation to treat your friend like yourself? Or Kiva said it's why is Hillel saying it in this kind of a much more narrow fashion? Don't treat your friend in a way that you want to be treated. So the Maharsha says because like the Ramban already noted, like Tosfos says in Sanhedrin, this is really a haflaga. The V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha doesn't apply in Bechaim. It doesn't applies only in sort of weird situations, like negative situations where you shouldn't come to hate your wife. You shouldn't give somebody a harder death than they otherwise can get. But the actual within life to have a positive affirmative obligation to treat your friend like yourself, we don't have such an obligation. Tosfos says that we could have also necessarily seen that from the pasuk. Mashal also noticed the Ramban as well that in the pasuk of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, there's a first part, right? There's a two parts to that pasuk. The pasuk says Leisikim leisites b'nei Amecha V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha ani Hashem. So because it juxtaposes not taking the common atira to loving your fellow like yourself, says the Maharsha and the Ramban as well, that maybe there was a connection, and Tosfos as well, that the V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha was never to be seen as an independent chiyuv, that you should really be treating your neighbor exactly like you, mamish positive affirmatively, but rather it was in the context of the negative. Don't do nekama, treat your friend like you wouldn't want to be treated. In other words, not that you have a positive firm obligation to be super unbelievable to them the way you treat yourself, no. But don't do nekama. Treat them like you love them. So don't take revenge against them. So it's always understood in a much more negative, in a way, rather than in a positive, new, affirmative obligation kind of a manner. That is the Gemara told the two dots. And so we'll continue now from the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us, Tanim ha'yishcherim noam lo mechas nesem begadim mechuarim. Right, if you had white clothes, you put on dark clothes. If you had dark clothes, but the dark clothes are looking nice, so then we get rid of those clothes and put on really more disgusting clothes. So the Gemara says, Hayala Klezav, if she had gold jewelry, right, we would take that away. Right? The Mishnah said, I'm sorry, that if she had jewelry, we take it away. It says Mar Pshita. Obviously, you take away the jewelry. Hashtan Navali Minavale, Hani Mibaya. We talking about all these things they were trying to be Minavala, right? We'd taken off the hair and unplating, the hair and ripping out the clothing. Oh, obviously, we're trying to be embarrassing, humiliating her. So you would think we let her walk around with jewelry. Says "Man, the time about honey isle bizayon tzvei." Some would say that there's actually more bizayon to walk around with jewelry when you're disrobed, right? That's like lipstick on the pig, right? Because I mentioned shliach artov v'sayim misani, right? Somebody is like naked and they're wearing shoes, like that's like a joke, That's even more bizyonis. Says the more Kamash Malon, no Kamash Malon that it would still be considered sort of more uppity for this woman to be wearing gold jewelry when she's going through the Sotah process, the Sotah ordeal. So therefore, we take it off her as well. Um, the what do you call the fact is that all of these measures that are being done are with one goal and one purpose in mind, namely to attempt to put her into a state of mind which is going to be willing to say, look, I'm in the mace, I don't want to drink, go out without a ksuba, etc. But to avoid the Shem Vashem being nimchak in the waters. Continues the Mishnah, maybe Chevel Mitzri. So then they brought a sort of an Egyptian rope, which they would use to tie it around her. And that would keep her clothes up. So the Gemara wants to know, Rabbi Abba Merav, Huna Chevel HaMitzri Mao Shiyakim B'Sotah. Is this Chevel Mitzri something that's mamish ma'akiv? Like if you don't have this Egyptian rope, it's ma'akiv, or is it sort of just like any rope? It's not really ma'akiv to have an Egyptian rope. Says the Gemara, Bamine Rabbi Abba Merav, Huna Chevel HaMitzri Mao Shiyakim B'Sotah, Mishum Shlo Yish Mitu Begadei Me'alehu. Right, because if the goal here is not to allow her clothes to fall, so if you're using some sort of a rope, then it would still cut the namisag, and then you can even use some sort of little rope or whatever, something that's not a chevel mitzvah, and it'll still do the job, and therefore that should be sufficient. Maybe chevel hamitzvah v'koshel and me'akev. In other words, the other option is maybe we're going to say no, because we said that she used some sort of a rope, some sort of ribbons to attract the guy who she was the subject of a kinyan steer on. So therefore now the figure maybe chevel mitzri. So therefore we're now bringing a chevel mitzri, which is like specific to the action that she has done, and therefore we're tying that around her because that was reminiscent of those terrible actions, right? Right? She acted in a very Egyptian kind of manner, very inappropriate manner. So therefore, we want to use the Chavel Mitzri, which brings out that fact that, as we're going to say, as Rashi notes, we treat somebody the way they, heaven treats people the way they are treating others. So since she was Chagas Asim Tzilzul nice before, since she used a bindle, right, some sort of a string to beautify herself, so therefore we use the Chevel Mitzvah, which is a reminiscent of the actions of Mitzrayim, which obviously are very terrible, and therefore it is going to be ma'akiv if we don't actually have it, because that is redolent, that is reminiscent of her actions. And if we didn't have it, that would then be ma'akiv. So then my answer is Amalei Tanisur. We learned it already. Mitzri. They bring this Egyptian rope, and they tie it around above her chest, in order so the clothes shouldn't fall off. So you see that the fundamental reason here is the clothes shouldn't fall off, not specifically humiliation. And so therefore, if you don't have the Chel Mitzvah, you have some other sort of a string, it would obviously be no problem. I should point out that I don't really understand the Tanisua. What do you mean that we learned it already? The mission didn't tell us the reason. The mission just told us, it didn't say Kidei. The Kidei is not in the Mishnah. So where is this Kidei? I'm not sure. But the Gemara seems to be suggesting that this is part of the original Limud Tosfos. So Tosfos, two Tosfos on this topic. The first Tosfos on the page, the Tosfos is asking that if the Chevel Mitzri, the Gemara in the Yerushalmi said the Chevel Mitzri comes from Mishari Halishka. That's where they get the money to buy it. So Tosfos says, what about the sudar they used to choke somebody to death? or the sword that you use to kill somebody. The Gemara tells that these Arba Mitzvahs Bezdin, you have various implements that are needed. So over there we say Dibar Mishal Tzibor. Those are also coming from the public dime. Is that also by those things also going to be coming from the Shara Lishka? This is not sure. And then Taisus continues, and in the next Taisus of where it says Tinisu or Tinyana, Taisus says, Taisus says, Taisus says, I don't actually know what is being proved from here. More than what it said before, which is she also used sort of ribbons to make herself look beautiful. The mashma the chevel mitzri be'inan mamish, right? Says, what is this tinisua telling you that is anything, right? The tinisua just says you tire chevel mitzri. How is it telling you that it's there to hold up the clothes? Maybe it's literal in the sense that she, used inappropriate ribbons to beautify herself. So we use the chevel mitzvah, which is going to be sort of reminding of that by her, and it is required. How does this Tanisua teach us anything different? So Taisa says, "Va'akarchach lechatchil mitzvah be'inon, avolav dafka le'ikov." Taisa says, what it must be is that there's a mitzvah to use the chevel mitzvah, but it's not necessarily a ma'akev. That if I don't have it, then it's going to be ruined. And Taisa says that this is, problematic to assume that it was absolutely required to have the Chevel Mitzri, is a problem because how could you imagine that if you didn't have it, it would be a literal ikov? The Torah never mentioned anything about Chevel Mitzri. The Torah does mention, for example, Paras Reisha Isha, as we pointed out before. And what if if you weren't Paras Reisha Isha? It's still going to be a kosher Sotah situation. So how could something that's not even mentioned in the Torah actually be ma'akiv? So again, Taisus does in the end seem to think that if you look at Taisus says that if you're medactic and Pirish Rashi, this is not really a question. The Iker have also come a boile. Imisham mida b'mida dafka chaval, or imisham shmidas begadim. Right? Is it dafka mida b'mida that you require the chaval, or that you need the clothing to be held up? That was the Gemara's question. And the Gemara is saying, "Miu heicha deleka chaval mitzri v'ika tziltzul loy mahadarna yosim midai basa chaval." We're not going to make you go crazy to go find this sort of a road. But again, it's not clear to me where this Tanisua is. Is it literally a quote? I couldn't find it in Tosefta, but the way we're concluding the Gemara is that if you don't have a Chavel Mitzri, you don't have to go chase after it. It's no problem. Just use any sort of a rope that will keep her clothes on. We're not looking for her to be entirely disrobed, even according to the Chacham. In other words, we're looking to humiliate her, we're looking to rip open her clothes, but it's not to be fully disrobed. We're going to tie a rope around her so that her clothes shouldn't fully fall off. All right, continues the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, anybody who wanted to come see the process was allowed to. It says Mahagufa Kasha, but this itself is a question. What do we mean? Right. You said in the Mishnah anybody wants to come see the process of the site is allowed to. Both men and women are able to come. And then it says later on that all the women were permitted to go see the action. The women were permitted to go see the action. And what's that mean? If the women are permitted to go see the action, then doesn't that tell me Nashim ein, Nashim en, and Nashim lai, that only women, not men. So the beginning of the mission, the Mashim, both men and women are coming, and the end of the mission, the Mashim, just women, not men. So Rabbi says, don't read it as talking about women, read it as men. Any of the men who want to come, it's fine. So Amalei Rava, this is the second time we had this, right? If you look back on Zion and Beis in the bottom, right, we had a situation where Rabbi wanted to change Sheveres Ksubasa to Tini Mikaras, just change it. And Rabbi was like, whoa, 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 you can't do that. Also, you want Sanhedrin on Yud and Beis, you see something similar over there, where Abai is willing to change something, and Rabbi was like, whoa, 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 you can't do that. So here as well, Abai is willing to say, well, just treated as anashim. We're talking about men, coming, not women. So Amalei Rav of Hakol writes the lyrics by Raya Katana. You can't just say it's talking about men and then there's no contradiction, right? Abai wants to say that whoever wants to see it's referring to the men, and then the women are also permitted to come. So that's how I would say both men and women. But according to the way Rava wants to learn, it doesn't work, says Rava. You can't just change it. The Mishnah says what it said. It said that in the beginning part of the Mishnah. It said, "V'chol rice, rice." Anybody wants to come see it can come. And then, "V'chol nashim taras rice," and all women are permitted. So it's mashma that in the beginning, both men and women are, the when it says it initially, "V'chol rice," is mashma that does make a difference between man and woman. And then when it says that women are permitted, mashma there is a difference between men and women, that women are permitted and men are not. So Abaya's answer is leaving Rava feeling empty, so he doesn't like it. So rather, what does he want to say? It's to the stira. So what does Rava say instead? Says the Gemara, Elo Amar Rava Kol writes the lyrics Baraya. When the Mishnah says whoever wants to come see is able to see, Losh Negarvelu, Losh Nashi, it's totally fine, either one. However, the Nashim Chayavas the rights, but by the woman they are actually required to. So when the Mishnah said V'chal Nashim Utaris the rights, Rav is reading that as no, they're actually mechuyev. Any women who are there at the time are mechuyev to go see it. It's not just permitted. And what's Rava's proof? Shneimar, because the pasuk says v'nasu kol anashim v'yisayasena kemaz kezimas kana. Right, so the women are going to all be sufficiently chagrined and put into fear, and they won't do this kind of a zinus. And that's only going to happen if they're there. If they're not there, then it won't work. Second hand or third hand, it's not going to make anybody scared. So that is the opinion of Rava. So according to Rava, when the Mishnah tells us that v'chol ha'aretz l'oreis bar l'oreis, that is referring to both men and women. And when it says v'chol ha'nashim mutaris l'oreis, it doesn't actually mean mutaris. It means they're mechuyev. Any women who are there are mechuyev to actually go see the debacle, the spectacle that is taking place. Okay. She mentioned that the Taisa Shantz over here asked a question. Taisa Shantz says, "This Chevel Mitzri business, I don't really understand it," says the Taisa Shantz. By the Priya is not Ma'akev, so why is the Chevel Mitzri going to be Ma'akev? What's even the Havamina? So he says, well, the Priya is not Ma'akev according to Rabbi Huda if she was really pretty, but if she's not, or according to the Chachamim, regardless, Priya is sort of a requirement that is, fundamental. But even if it's not done, it's still okay. That is only according to Rabbi Yehuda. But according to Chacham, who said it's going to be okay? So according to Chacham, since it's still actually required, so therefore it can be seen like the Chaval Mitzvah should also be in theory required. It's in the Havin of the Gemara. In the end, of course, the Gemara doesn't say that it is required. This continues the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us, it's a new Mishnah here on Chesed Beis, and the way that a person treats others, that's how they treat him. We've had similar things like this in terms of mini Keneged Mida and the like. Hashem acts with those the way they act with him, with others, etc. He kashed the Atzman Avera, she bejeweled herself for Avera, Hamakim Nivla. So the Rebbe makes her disgusting. He goes as Atzman Avera, she sort of exiled herself to a place in order to be able to sin. Hamakim Gila. So I'm sorry. He golsa as Atzma means she revealed. She revealed herself for Avera. So Hamakim Gila Allah. The Rebbe Shalom is revealing her now out to the world. Biarach Eskila Bavera. She started to sin with her thighs. Rashi says that's sort of the beginning part of the joy of the illicitness. That's what she felt it at first. And the lashon of Rashi is b'derech tashma shayarach nen tchila b'kirba. So that's sort of the first place that's able to be tingly and feeling. And so too that is how she dies. Rabbi Yarech is chila b'avera. Tchila by the yarech is the thigh. That's where she started with the avera. So v'achar kach habeten, and then later on the womb. Fikach tigla hayarech. Tilge hayarech tchila v'achar kach habeten. That's why. So too, when it talks about Yerech Nefelas, Vespednech Tzava, the Yerech comes first before the womb. The rest of the body wouldn't explode. That was just those parts because they had been involved in the Maisa. It is a Gemara. Rav Yosef, Afagav to be the Betela, even though the Mida of the Armis Bezdin has been bottled, we no longer have it. The Mida loy bottled. There's aspects of it that have not been bottled. Rav Yosef, Chantan, Bchim, Yom Shechar, B'Shamik, Shafa, B'Shabbat, the Sanhedrin. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and the Sanhedrin was bottled, and therefore, since the Malkim is Gerim and the Armis Bezdin is now over, so Armis Bezdin loy bottled. But the Armis was not yet Mivutal. That was not yet bottled. Um, that was not yet batal. Again, just to be clear on the lashon over here, was just saying that Miyum Shechar Beis Hamikdash was batal Sanhedrin and the Arab Mrs. Bezdin, um, uh, it was not batal. And the more says, "How batal? What do you mean? How do you say it wasn't batal? It was batal. El din Arab Mrs. Bezdin like batal, but the din of Arab Mrs. was batal. In other words, the Bezdin not going to kill you, but somebody who deserves it is still going to get Shem Shemayim. This didn't exactly take place when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Already we explained, the Gemara told us in Sanhedrin Mamalch that already 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, they had already moved to Lechanos. They already stopped killing any capital punishments. So the Gemara says, what does it mean when we say that Arba Mrs. Bezdin is bottle, but the Mida of it is not bottle? What exactly does that mean? So the Gemara explains, Mishin is Chayev Skiloi Nefel Menagag, somebody who, right? Somebody who's Chayev Skila, so he's going to get his Skila. He's not getting in a Bezdin, but he's going to be falling from the roof, or he's going to be, trounced upon by some sort of an animal, or Mishin is Chayev Sreifa, somebody who's in Chayev Sreifa, right? Either he's going to be bitten by a snake, or he's going to fall into a fire. So it's like getting a Sreifa, but not getting it from a jury of his peers in the Sanhedrin. I listen by love, or maybe he's going. I'm sorry. Mishin is Chayev Hariga, someone is Chayev Hereg, is going to get punished. And Nimsal Malchus, either by being given over to the kingdom, which usually that's how they kill, right? I listen by love, or he's going to have robbers who are going to come kill him. Mishin is Chayev Chaniga, somebody is Chayev Chenek, going to the Abenar, he's either going to choke him by drowning, or Metzber Sorchani, he's going to have some sort of other disease, coughing, that's going to prevent him from breathing. So do you say now about this situation, right? There was, sort of Leilenu, this past week, Rabbi Nishra Favelson's daughter died of a very severe asthma attack, right? She can't breathe, and you have a terrible asthma attack, it stops your breathing. Are we saying that somebody like that Chas V'Shalom, such a person was Chaim and Chanika? Right, and there would be potentially attendant ramifications. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin Memvav that somebody who's mechuyev from the Armis Bezdin is killed by the Bezdin, he's not going to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, at least for the first year, until Malakat Tzamas. We don't really have that kind of meaning anymore. So is that something that we're afraid of? So this tshuva was, this question was asked to Chassam Sofer in the tshuva. The Chassam Sofer responded, and he said that no, this is not something that is relevant at all. That in fact we do not concern ourselves that somebody who died in a way that would be reminiscent of something like this. He's actually writing this in Parsha Shoftim. He says, would you say Reb Chanina? I'm sorry, Reb Akiva, the Asur Malchus, that they were all killed by the government. You say that the Gemara says that Mishin is Chayev Hariga Nimsal Malchus. They're going to be given over to the kingdom to be killed. So anybody gets killed by the state, so therefore they're not going to be entitled to a Jewish burial. Or Kiva was killed by the state. The Asur Malchus, they were killed. But how many Jews were killed by the state? So you're saying they're all situations Chayev Hariga and Nimsal Malchus. Obviously, they were for whatever reason. In the case of Asur Hariga and Malchus, Hashem wanted them dead. It wasn't because they were mechuyev to a death like that, because they had done something wrong. Sometimes it just says you can't say that about anybody. If in fact heaven has their cheshbonis, that's heaven's business. But from our perspective, anybody gets killed by the government, anybody gets killed in any manner, we're not going to adjudicate as to how they did it or what they deserved, and they wouldn't have any attendant ramifications in terms of being buried in a Jewish cemetery. They'd be totally buried, no question. And the lashon the Chassam Sofer says is, it doesn't say that Mishin is Chayev Hariga ay Nimsal Malchus. It doesn't say, the Gemara says Mishin is Chayev Hariga Nimsal Malchus. Someone is Chayev Hariga, someone is Chayev, to be his head chopped off, that he's going to be given to the kingdom. It doesn't say Mishin Nimsal Malchus Chayev Hariga. It says Mishin is Chayev Hariga Nimsal Malchus. So in other words, There are going to be people that the Malchus is going to kill or not Nischai B'Harigan. Like, that's Oregon Malchus. And therefore, from our perspective, there's no need to make that assumption if somebody dies in a Mashiach way to say, oh, well, that reminds me of this Misa, therefore we shouldn't bury the Jews out there. No, zero, no chance. Not that's not going to be it. All right, we'll have to stop over here and do the next final show before we go back to being live on Testament Aleph.